I woke up tasting pennies and sugar at the same time. The air was wrong, sweet metallic, like someone had spilled candy over rust. My wrists burned where rope bit into skin, and when I tried to shift, the sting sharpened until my eyes watered. Somewhere above me, a fan rattled, slow and tired, pushing heat in lazy circles. Concrete pressed cold through my shoulder. In the darkness, a child breathed, small and uneven, close enough that I could feel the tremor of it. My heart slammed once, then tried to run. I forced it back, one breath, then another, counting. Counting kept me from screaming. If I screamed, the child would scream, and then we would both waste what little air felt safe to use. I turned my head an inch. Strands of dark hair lay across the child's forehead, damp with sweat. Her eyes were shut tight, lashes stuck together. I didn't know her name, or mine in that moment. Not really. I only knew the rule I'd learned as a mother. Panic is contagious, so calm has to be too. I breathed slow, listening for footsteps. Somewhere far off, a door clanged, and my stomach tightened hard again. 10 days earlier, I had been locking up my clinic in Little Village, hands aching from back-to-back sessions. The waiting room still smelled like crayons and disinfectant, the cheap kind that never quite masks old fear. Ava was curled on the worn couch with her sneakers still on, a library book open on her chest like a shield. I stepped over a pile of donated toys and stared at the mail on my desk. Overdue notices, a utility warning, a reminder that compassion doesn't pay rent. I told myself tomorrow would be easier. It wasn't. Jade's number lit my phone. Jade Collins never called that late unless something was on fire, and in our world, fire usually meant a kid. She didn't waste time with small talk. She told me a hospital needed a speech therapist right away. A pediatric trauma case. Selective mutism. My body begged for my bed, but my brain heard the words like a siren. That was my specialty. The children who stop speaking because silence feels safer than memory. Jade mentioned the private wing, the kind of place with marble floors and quiet money. I woke Ava gently and drove. Chicago's nightlights blurred past. The hospital's VIP entrance looked like a boutique hotel pretending to be medical. Art hung on walls where regular families would have stared at outdated posters. A receptionist smiled too smoothly, and a guard watched my bag like it might bite. I tugged my cardigan straight and tried to look like someone who belonged. An elevator carried me up in silence, and when the doors opened, the hallway held men in dark suits instead of scrubs. Their shoes didn't squeak. They clicked. A nurse led me to a room at the end, and I felt my spine go rigid instantly. Inside, the machines hummed softly, but the loudest thing was the silence of the boy on the bed. Leo Ricci looked 6, maybe 7, knees tucked to his chest, gaze fixed somewhere far behind the wall. His eyes were a winter green, too old for a face that still had baby softness at the edges. A doctor listed facts about his body being fine, his mind being unreachable. I didn't correct the language. I just asked for space. They hesitated, then filed out, leaving one suited guard behind glass, and me on linoleum with a child who wouldn't speak yet. I sat cross-legged, lower than his eye line, and pulled paper and colored pencils from my bag. I started drawing shapes that meant nothing, letting my hand move so the room could breathe. Minutes passed. Leo's attention flickered once, then again, like a candle fighting wind. I kept my face soft, my shoulders loose, my mouth quiet. When his small hand finally reached for a green pencil, relief hit me so hard it felt like pain. He drew a bare tree, branches reaching, no leaves. Then he pressed red at the roots, a mark that made my throat tighten immediately. I didn't ask what the red meant. I didn't push words into his mouth like medicine. I added a small bird on one branch, something that stayed even when the season was cruel, and I watched him consider it. His gaze lifted to mine. Knowledge kids aren't meant to carry. I told him, softly, that he was safe in this moment, and I meant it. Behind the glass, the guard wasn't the only shadow. I felt another presence, still as stone, watching like a claim. I kept my focus on Leo until my legs numbed and the room grew quiet. When the door opened, the staff looked stunned. They listed the small miracles, a pencil chosen, a drawing shared, eyes finally meeting mine. I nodded and packed my supplies, pretending my hands weren't shaking. Outside, the men in suits shifted, and the nurse's face tightened with caution. She told me Leo's father wanted to speak with me personally, tonight, in the parking garage. My stomach dropped. I followed the signs anyway, because leaving felt like abandoning him. Each step toward the elevator sounded too loud. I knew I was walking toward the source of that unseen stare and feared it. By the time I reached the parking garage, My hands were still stained with green pencil dust. I kept seeing Leo's tree, bare branches and that red mark at the roots, like a bruise on paper. The elevator doors opened onto concrete and exhaust, and the air felt colder than it should have. Somewhere a car alarm chirped once and died. 2 suited men stood near a black sedan, not blocking my path, just defining it. I told myself I was a clinician, not a guest, and walked anyway. He stepped out from the shadow beside a support column, and the garage seemed to reorganize around him. Damian Ricci looked like someone who never rushed, even when the world was on fire. His suit was dark and perfectly fitted, his hair combed back, his face calm in a way that made my pulse feel loud. His eyes were the same winter green as Leo's, but harder, like glass over ice. I noticed the small things my training notices: the controlled breathing, the still hands, the distance he kept until he chose not to. I also noticed my own body reacting, heat under my skin that I refused to call anything. He didn't introduce himself the way normal parents do. He assessed me, the same way the guards had, and then he laid out an offer with the precision of a contract. He wanted me for Leo, exclusively, as if my schedule and my life were items that could be moved from one shelf to another. He spoke of resources, private rooms, equipment, and a number so large my throat tightened. With that kind of money I could replace the clinic windows, pay my debt, stop choosing between groceries and electricity, and maybe buy Ava a bed that didn't fold into a couch. For a brief, shameful second, I felt my resistance wobble, because I was tired of being heroic for free. Then Leo's face flashed in my mind. Not the guarded stare, but the moment his fingers closed around the pencil like it was a lifeline. My work only functions when trust is real, and trust dies the second it becomes payroll obedience. I told Damian, as calmly as I could, that I was not leaving my kids in Little Village, and I was not disappearing into one mansion no matter how polished the marble was. If he wanted my help, he would bring Leo to my clinic, or he would accept my hours and my boundaries. I explained that children hear power in a room even when words are quiet, and Leo needed safety more than luxury. The air between us tightened, not with shouting, but with the shock of being refused. He didn't argue like a man used to debate. He simply let me see how much he already knew, and the knowledge landed like a hand around my wrist. He knew my full name, the address of my clinic, the landlord who kept raising my rent, the fact that the back window never latched right. He knew Ava's school, the aftercare hours, the name of the woman who signed her out when I ran late. He knew I drove an old car with a temperamental door lock, and that my phone bill was 2 weeks behind. None of it was said with gloating. It was said with certainty, as if facts were weapons he kept polished. My cheeks burned with anger, because a part of me had wanted to believe my life was small enough to be invisible. He made invisibility impossible. I left the garage with my spine straight and my stomach shaking. The nurse tried to escort me, but I waved her off and walked alone to my car, repeating that I was safe, I was fine, I was in control. On the expressway home, headlights gathered behind me, and one black SUV stayed in my mirror longer than the others. I changed lanes. It changed lanes. I exited early and looped a side street. When I merged back, it was there again, one car length behind, patient as a shadow. I told myself it was coincidence, because coincidence is easier than admitting fear. But my fingers were white on the steering wheel by the time I pulled up outside my apartment. Ava met me at the door in pajamas, hair sticking up in tired angles, her face brightening and then narrowing when she read mine. I tried to smile like nothing in the world had shifted. I made her a snack, checked her backpack, asked about school, and listened with half my mind. Then she mentioned, casually, that a new man had been near the pickup line the last few days. Not a teacher, not a parent, just standing where he could see everyone. She said he looked at our car when we drove away. The words made cold crawl up my arms. I laughed too lightly and told her it was probably a security guard, but my voice did not convince either of us. My phone buzzed. My no suddenly did not matter. The message that arrived after Ava went to sleep wasn't long, but it changed the air in my apartment. The unknown number didn't threaten outright. It simply carried Damian's certainty, the kind that treated my refusal like a temporary misunderstanding. I lay awake listening to pipes clank and cars pass, replaying Leo's bare tree and the red mark at its roots. By morning, I moved through my routine like a person crossing ice, careful with every step. I packed Ava's lunch, checked the locks twice, and told myself I could still live my life even if someone else watched quietly. At the clinic, the neighborhood felt the way it always did. Tired faces, sirens in the distance, parents apologizing for being late because buses ran slow. I listened harder than usual for footsteps behind me. A black SUV sat across the street longer than a delivery driver ever would. I tried to pretend it meant nothing. I did my sessions, filed notes, smiled for kids who needed me steady, then picked up Ava from aftercare and acted normal while she talked about spelling words. At 6 in the evening, I drove toward the Gold Coast, stomach tight, hands steady anyway. Inside Damian's house, cameras blinked like indifferent eyes, but Leo was the only thing that mattered once I entered the therapy room. I brought wooden blocks and a small hand drum from the clinic. Nothing fancy, just familiar tools. Leo didn't speak, yet he started to build instead of destroy. He stacked 3 blocks, paused, then matched my rhythm when I tapped the drum softly on my knee. Parallel play became a conversation. My steady beat, his careful hands, both of us acting like silence wasn't a wall. When he slid a block toward me, my chest loosened with hope. Grace Bennett appeared in the doorway carrying a tray. She was in her 50s, silver threaded through dark hair, eyes warm but sharp, the kind of woman who could comfort a child and terrify a careless adult. Before I could decline, she guided me toward coffee and a plate of something buttery and homemade, insisting my body couldn't heal anyone if it ran on fumes. Her humor came in soft jabs at the mansion's seriousness, and for a minute I remembered what it felt like to breathe without bracing. Even Ava relaxed around her, as if Grace carried safety too. Dinner happened at a table built for 20, but only 3 of us sat there, and the emptiness was loud. Candlelight softened the edges, not the mood. Damian watched everything, especially how Leo kept glancing at me to make sure I stayed. I studied the walls, portraits, and wood carrying the hush of a house trained to hide pain. Luxury was everywhere, yet grief was the centerpiece, stubborn and unseen. I thought about my clinic's chipped paint and Ava's worn sneakers, and how sorrow doesn't need marble to feel huge. When Damian's eyes met mine, I looked away too late. After dinner, the truth surfaced the way bruises do, slowly, when the adrenaline fades. Leo's silence wasn't stubbornness, it was protection. Damian let the story spill in clipped pieces. An attack meant for him, a mother who stepped between danger and her child, and a little boy who watched her vanish. No details, just the fact, clean and awful. Empathy rose first, then anger so hot it startled me. What kind of world hands a child that memory and expects words afterward? I pressed my nails into my palm and promised myself I would never rush Leo. Not for anyone. The next day, Damian laid the danger out like math. The Volkov Bratva had been circling his world, looking for leverage, and my name had entered their notes. I tried to insist I was only a therapist, but he reminded me enemies don't care about titles, only pressure points. Then the second truth hit harder. The SUV near my clinic and the man near Ava's school weren't all Bratva. Some were his, placed there first, protection packaged as permission. My skin went cold, exposed and furious. I grabbed my bag and left before my anger broke something I couldn't fix. Outside, the night air tasted clean, but my thoughts were loud. I drove toward my apartment, scanning mirrors, imagining Ava's face, hearing Grace's warnings in my memory. When did safe start sounding like owned? At a red light, I checked my phone and resisted the urge to call Jade, because saying it out loud would make it real. In my parking spot, I crouched by the rear bumper, pretending I'd dropped my keys, and my fingers found a tiny sticker pressed under the plastic lip. Barely visible, but deliberate. My breath caught. Someone had marked me and I hated it. I sat in my car, hands on the wheel, and tried to breathe. Leo needed me, and I refused to punish him for his father's power. But Ava needed a mother who could keep her safe, not one who dragged danger home. The sticker under my bumper was tiny, yet it rewrote my map. Warning had become preparation, and preparation always comes before impact. The next morning, I reached Ava's school early and watched strangers twice. Then I drove to my clinic, praying the locks would hold. I didn't say it aloud, but I felt it. Someone was done asking. After I found the little sticker under my bumper, sleep stopped being a place I could reach. I checked the deadbolt twice, then 3 times, then stood in the dark listening to my own breathing and Ava's. Morning came anyway. I packed her lunch with hands that shook only when she looked away. I smiled too much, asked too many questions about spelling tests, and scanned every window reflection as we walked to the car. I told myself I was imagining it. I told myself mothers cannot afford imagination. By noon, my nerves felt like exposed wires under cheap insulation. At the clinic, the sidewalk was littered with glittering glass, like someone had dumped a jar of ice across my doorstep. The front window was gone. The door hung crooked. Inside, my file cabinets lay on their sides, papers fanned out like wounded birds. Toys were smashed. The little drum I used for rhythm games was split in half. Paint sprayed across the wall in a harsh symbol that didn't need translation. Whoever did this wanted me to see it, to feel it. My throat burned as if I had swallowed smoke. This place was my promise to the kids. I stood in the wreckage and felt grief punch straight through anger. Every binder on the floor held a child's progress, a parent's hope, my late nights and second jobs. I thought about the boy with a stutter whose mom paid in folded cash and apology. I thought about the twins who practiced sounds while Ava colored beside them. Someone had torn up more than furniture. They had tried to erase the part of me that still believed effort mattered. My phone buzzed with missed calls, but I couldn't move yet. Then I saw the backpack empty by the door. My lungs forgot how to work. That backpack held her inhaler, her library book, the little keychain she rubbed when she was nervous. I spun in circles, checking the waiting room, the back office, the closet where we kept donated coats. Nothing. I called her aftercare and heard only ringing. The clinic smelled like paint and broken plastic as I sprinted back outside. The street felt too wide, too open. I drove like I was chasing a sound I could barely hear, every red light a personal insult. Motherhood is terror with a calendar. I kept seeing the red roots. At the aftercare door, a staff member opened it with a face already apologizing. Ava was inside, sitting too still, her hands folded tight in her lap. The backpack lay on the floor beside her. But the zipper was open. Pockets turned out like someone had searched it. She ran to me, but she didn't talk, just clung, breathing fast. I checked her arms, her hair, her shoes, as if danger could hide in fabric. The staff explained they had found the bag outside, near the curb, minutes earlier. I nodded like I understood. Inside, I felt snap into place. When we returned to the clinic, black SUVs were already lining the street, 5 of them, engines idling like quiet threats. Damian stepped out of the lead vehicle, not hurried, not dramatic, just inevitable. He took one look at the damage, then at Ava's pale face, and his jaw tightened. He didn't offer comfort the way men in movies do. He offered instructions, a plan, names of people who would handle repairs, and men who would stand between us and the next message. I hated how relief flooded me anyway. My pride wanted to fight him. My motherhood wanted armor. He made it clear that my apartment and my clinic were now addresses on someone else's list. Staying put, pretending I could outwork danger, would only give enemies a routine to exploit. I tried to insist I could manage with police reports and stronger locks. But even as I formed the thought, I pictured Ava walking to the car alone for 1 second. That image ended the argument inside me. Damian arranged a move to his house, a separate wing, guards at doors, cameras in halls. I told myself I agreed for Leo. Truth was plain. I was terrified always. The ride north felt like crossing a border with no passport. Ava watched the city slide past and asked questions I answered with half-truths and a steady tone. Damian's men moved our bags as if we were already assigned to this place. In the separate wing, the sheets were too smooth, the rooms too quiet. A guard stood outside our door all night. Grace brought cocoa for Ava, and a sweater for me, as if comfort could soften steel. I thanked her, then cried in the bathroom where no one could see. Relief tasted like shame and hated it. Later, after Ava slept, I unpacked in the quiet. Her inhaler was there, along with the stuffed rabbit she pretended not to love. I exhaled. Then I reached for my clinic keys and felt nothing. I had left them on the counter beside the broken glass, the last honest proof that I still belonged to my own street. My old life was now behind a door I could not open. Temporary suddenly sounded like a lie people told to make fear polite. In the distance, a piano note drifted through the house, soft and lonely. Tomorrow, Leo and I begin. The mansion had its own quiet, the kind that came from thick walls and too many rules. Guards changed shifts without looking at me, and cameras blinked like they were breathing. Ava explored our separate wing in socks, holding her stuffed rabbit by one ear, pretending she was brave. I brewed tea I could not taste and told myself this was temporary, just a pause until my clinic was safe again. Still, every time I heard a door click, my shoulders jumped. I kept my smile for her, while my mind counted exits and distances. Morning sessions with Leo were the only hours that felt honest. I drove from the Gold Coast down to Little Village with a security car behind me, hating how quickly I got used to it. At the clinic's temporary borrowed room, I stacked wooden blocks in slow towers, tapped a soft rhythm on the table, and let Leo choose the next move. He did not speak, but he placed blocks beside mine, aligning edges with careful attention. Progress looked like that, small and stubborn. Then evenings pulled me to Damian's house, where silence echoed louder. Grace Bennett met us in the hallway outside the library, as if she could sense when fear was about to harden my face. She pressed a warm plate into my hands before I could refuse. And she did it with a smile that carried years of keeping children fed during storms. Ava followed her like a curious duckling, distracted by Grace's stories and the smell of cinnamon. For a few minutes, I forgot the guards. The mansion felt less like a fortress and more like a home that had lost someone and still kept breathing. The piano sat in the corner of the therapy room, polished and untouched, like a memory nobody wanted to disturb. Its lid reflected the afternoon light and the dust drifting in it. I remembered sitting on my own couch years ago, humming a simple lullaby for Ava when nightmares made her fists curl tight. Not the words, just the steady rise and fall, the promise that morning always comes. I told myself, Leo deserved that kind of rhythm too. Music could be a bridge when speech was too sharp. I sat at the bench slowly. I angled my body so Leo could see my face, not just my hands. I pressed one middle note, gentle, and let it hang in the air until the room stopped holding its breath. Leo stood near the window, shoulders high, watching as if sound might bite. I played 2 more notes, simple, spaced apart, nothing fancy. I kept my expression calm, like I did when Ava learned to swim, letting fear pass through without letting it steer. After a long minute, Leo took 1 step closer. His fingers hovered above the keys, trembling slightly. I didn't reach for him. I didn't ask questions. I just shifted my playing to invite, the way you leave a door cracked for a shy cat. Leo's index finger lowered onto a white key. The note sounded thin but perfect, and his eyes widened as if he hadn't expected it to obey him. He pressed another, then another. Not random, but searching for a pattern he could trust. My chest tightened with hope and fear in equal parts. I followed him softly, building harmony around his choices, letting him lead until his breath caught. That's when the sound changed. Leo's lips moved, and for the first time it wasn't just air. A fragile syllable slipped out, barely there, like a match struck in wind. My hands froze above the keys. Leo looked terrified of himself, trembling as if the room might punish him for breaking silence. I slid off the bench and knelt, keeping my voice low inside my own head, reminding myself to be steady. Tears collected in his lashes, and he leaned into me for 1 breath, then another, as if permission had finally arrived to speak. Damian appeared in the doorway, and I felt the room tilt. His usual mask was gone, replaced by a raw stillness that made him look younger and older at once. He moved slowly, careful, and lowered himself beside us as if the floor were holy. His hand hovered over Leo's hair, trembling with restraint, then settled for a heartbeat and pulled back. I watched a man built for power go helpless at a child's tiny sound. The moment wrapped around us like prayer and warning. I needed distance, yet I couldn't look away from it. After Leo settled, Grace guided him out for a break, and the room shrank to just Damian and me. His gratitude was intense, almost physical, and my boundaries wobbled under it. I reminded myself I was a therapist, not a miracle worker, not a prize. Still, my pulse kept time with the memory of his eyes on me through glass. I packed my pencils and blocks, forcing my hands to stop trembling. Part of me wanted to run to rules and safety. Another part whispered that rules do not stop feelings. They only name them. Ethan appeared before I could leave, and the air snapped cold. I knew it wasn't about Leo. He gave me the gist. The Volkov Bratva were moving, and the community center where I volunteered was now a target. Children I knew by name, kids who pressed crayon drawings into my hands, were suddenly leverage. My stomach dropped so hard I tasted metal. I stepped into the hallway and thought of Ava asleep upstairs, and of Leo's first syllable vibrating in my bones. The next choice would not be about comfort. It would be about sacrifice. That night, the message about the community center sank into my bones. I lay beside Ava's steady breathing and felt my own heartbeat misfire. Guilt sharp as a toothache. Kids I volunteered with were suddenly targets. Because I'd walked into Damian Ricci's world, they could burn. Sleep would not come. At 2 in the morning, the mansion sounded like it was holding its breath. Guards murmured somewhere distant, but our wing was dark. I packed a small bag with trembling precision, choosing essentials the way you choose words around a frightened child, quietly, carefully, fast before courage ran out. Then I padded to Ava's bed. Her rabbit was tucked under her chin, one ear folded, her mouth parted in sleep. I watched her chest rise and fall until my eyes stung. Her inhaler sat on the nightstand where I'd placed it, ready. She trusted me completely. It broke me. I told myself surrender was the cleanest choice. If they wanted leverage, I would remove the leverage by offering it. No gunfire at a playground, no smoke in a classroom, No terrified children huddled behind lockers. Just me, walking into danger on purpose, like stepping in front of traffic alone. On my desk, I found a notepad and wrote a few simple lines for Leo, the kind that wouldn't scare him, the kind that promised return without making promises I couldn't keep. I added a second note for Ava, explaining I was helping other kids. My handwriting shook all night. I zipped the bag and stepped into the hallway. The carpet muffled my footsteps, but my fear was loud. A shadow detached from the far wall, and Damian was suddenly there, blocking the path like a closed door. His eyes were storm bright, and I knew he'd been waiting for me. He didn't ask where I was going. He told me I wasn't. I heard ownership wrapped in concern, and it made my skin crawl. I tried to explain the orphanage, the kids, the fire they'd threaten, and how my body could take it if it saved them. His jaw clenched. What he meant was that he had lost a woman to that war, and he would not watch another disappear. What I heard was that my choice didn't count. I reminded him I was a mother and mothers do math with lives. If someone must be traded, I would volunteer. Something in him cracked, and something in me did too. I was furious, terrified, exhausted, and I couldn't ignore the pull between us. The way his attention felt like gravity. He stepped closer, and I should have moved away. Instead, I stayed, and his mouth met mine like a confession. That kiss wasn't romance. It was impact. When it broke, my legs shook, and my conscience screamed. I had crossed a line I'd protected for years. Damian stayed close without touching again, breathing, eyes wild with restraint. In an instant, I understood he didn't want love, but he couldn't stop it. After that, the choice left my hands. Damian's calm turned to cold focus, and the mansion woke up. Men moved through halls, phones glowing, doors opening. I didn't see weapons, but I felt them in the air. Ethan's name was mentioned, plans snapped into place, and protection stopped sounding gentle. Before dawn, engines filled the driveway. I watched from a window, Ava asleep behind me, my hands pressed to the glass. Damian climbed into the lead SUV with no hesitation, like regret was forbidden. The convoy moved out in formation, and the house fell silent, holding my breath for me. Time crawled. Leo felt the shift and went quiet, slipping toward old silence. Grace moved like a steady flame, setting out coffee and lighting one small candle. I kept Ava's breakfast routine, but my smile cracked. Every distant engine tightened my stomach, and I waited for the door to open. Headlights swept the driveway. I ran downstairs fast. Damian stepped out, pale under the light, his shirt marked with blood I refused to picture. His eyes held certainty that the threat was gone. Men moved behind him, silent. I reached for him, then stopped, afraid my touch break him. He mentioned a new name to Ethan, an echo of Volkov, and I understood the danger was not gone, only rearranged. The war had shifted, not ended. I guided him inside, shaking legs, thinking of towels, water, and how to keep Leo and Ava from reading on his face everything. Inside the bathroom, he sat on the tub's edge, shoulders rigid. I helped, because refusing me was useless. I cleaned what I could without asking questions. Water ran pink, then cleared, breathing eased. Anger had nowhere to land, so it turned into care I didn't know how to stop yet. Morning came. I acted normal. Grace distracted Ava with pancakes. I guided Leo through quiet halls, away from whispered updates. He noticed Damian's exhaustion and leaned toward me for steadiness. I became steadiness while my stomach churned. I promised myself their progress would not be collateral while I had breath. I had planned to sacrifice myself, and instead I was kissed into staying. Ava deserved answers I didn't have. Leo deserved calm I could barely perform. Damian's war protected children tonight, but it chained my life to his choices. I felt grateful, furious, and afraid that I had begun agreeing. By dawn, Damian lay down, spent. I stayed nearby, listening for Ava's breathing and Leo's footsteps. The mansion looked ordinary in morning light, which felt cruel. I understood the next weeks would be recovery. Bandages, guarded routines, and children relearning safety. I didn't know if my own heart would recover. Damian came home before sunrise, but the night stayed inside him. He moved like a man wearing wet clothes, heavier than his body should allow, and the mansion reacted the way a hospital does when someone critical arrives. Lights lowered, voices softened, footsteps rerouted. I kept Ava behind me, one hand on her shoulder, while Grace guided Leo to his room so he would not see the blood on his father's shirt. When the door finally closed, my world flipped from fear to function. I boiled water, laid out towels, and reminded myself that survival always charges interest later. The days that followed blurred into a routine I never asked for. I cleaned and rewrapped what I could, checked his temperature with the same focus I used on my patients, and watched Damian fight rest like it was an enemy. Fever came in waves, stealing color from his face, then retreating just enough for him to try to stand and work. Guards shifted outside the wing, radios whispering, doors clicking, the whole house breathing in careful intervals. At night I slept in short pieces, waking to distant footsteps and the soft rasp of Damian's breathing, praying I would not hear a crash. Leo became my anchor. Therapy shrank into gentler moments at the kitchen table, the library rug, the window seat where morning light made dust look like tiny stars. We played with blocks, matching patterns, tapping rhythms on the table with our fingertips. He hummed more often now, little strings of sound he did not yet trust to turn into words. Some days he formed a syllable and startled himself, then laughed in silent surprise. Each attempt felt like a door opening a crack. Ava learned the mansion's geography, the way kids learn new schools, by finding safe corners first. She claimed the armchair near the fireplace for reading, the breakfast nook for coloring, the back garden for quiet when too many strangers watched. Grace made pancakes shaped like hearts and pretended she had no idea how much that mattered. We started board games after dinner, simple ones Leo could join without pressure. Ava's smile returned in flashes. But I still caught her studying me when she thought I was not looking, as if measuring how much of me was now shared. Sometimes she watched Damian from behind my leg, curiosity fighting caution, and later she asked if his house had rules for hugs and bedtime stories. I answered with actions, not explanations, packing her lunches, braiding her hair, making sure she knew I was hers. One afternoon, during a calm session, Leo climbed onto the couch beside me with his sketch pad. He pointed to a drawing of 3 stick figures holding hands, then pressed his palm against my arm like he was pinning me to the moment. His mouth moved, working through effort and fear, and then the word arrived. Not loud, not perfect, but clear enough that my whole body froze. He called me Mama, with my name tangled after it, as if he needed to make it specific and safe. Warmth rushed through my chest so fast it hurt. Responsibility followed right behind it, heavy and holy. Ava stood in the doorway holding her rabbit, and her face changed in a way I will never forget. She did not cry or shout. She simply went still, then turned away like she had walked in on something private. Later that night, she climbed into my bed without asking, curled against my side, and breathed the way she did when she was younger and storms scared her. I stroked her hair until my fingers ached, promising silently that no one, not Damian, not Leo, not this house, could take her place. The mansion tried to return to normal, but normal here was built on secrets. I heard Damian's voice through a closed study door one evening, low and cold, and I recognized the tone that decided outcomes without debate. I did not catch details, and I did not want them, but the weight of it settled on my shoulders anyway. Loving him meant living beside choices I would never make, choices that kept children safe tonight and created more danger tomorrow. I hated that my relief depended on a world I morally resisted. When I confronted him later, I did it with shaking hands and a steady voice, because motherhood teaches you how to speak while afraid. Damian did not pretend he was innocent. He looked at the kids, at the way Leo leaned toward me now, at the way Ava had started to laugh again, and something in him softened into something like shame. He made it clear he was trying not to become gentle, but to become deliberate, to build instead of burn when building was possible. By the 4th week, color returned to his face, and restlessness returned with it. He started disappearing in the mornings with Ethan, coming back quieter than before, eyes holding plans he would not share. One afternoon, Grace handed me a garment bag and raised her eyebrows with a knowing smile. Soon after, Damian appeared at our door and conveyed that I should dress for something important. My stomach flipped, because in his world surprises could be gifts or chains. I looked at Ava, then at Leo, and felt hope and dread braid together as I reached for the zipper. Damian's secrecy followed me all morning. Grace handed me a garment bag and a look that tried to be comforting, but my nerves stayed sharp. In this house, surprises could be roses or restraints. I chose a simple dress, the kind I would wear to a school meeting, and I pinned my hair back with shaking fingers. Before I left, I crouched beside Ava's bed and watched her chest rise. She was awake, pretending not to be. I smoothed her hair, checked that her inhaler was in my purse, and promised her with my actions that she mattered more than any man's plans. She studied my face, hopeful and suspicious at once, then hugged me like she could anchor me to daylight. The driveway held a line of black SUVs, engines idling, windows tinted. Damian offered no explanation, only a steady hand at my elbow that felt like guidance and control in the same motion. Ava stayed with Grace and Leo, and that alone made my stomach twist. I hated leaving my children behind while I rode with a man who lived by contingency plans. The convoy rolled out of the Gold Coast and into the city, past boutiques and glass towers. Then farther south where the streets grew familiar. Each block tightened my throat. I kept imagining that we were driving to a courthouse, or a safe house, or some hidden room where he would demand my compliance. I forced myself to breathe and stared at street signs, counting turns like it could keep me safe. When we turned onto my old corner in Little Village, my heart lurched. The building should have looked wounded, boarded up, covered in the aftermath of that attack. Instead, it looked new. Fresh paint caught the sun. The front windows were whole, clear, and bright. A clean sign hung above the door with my name on it. Carter Center for Kids Speech and Play, like the neighborhood had always been meant to hold something hopeful. I stepped out of the SUV and my knees went weak. For a second, I could not decide whether to cry or run, because gifts in Damian's world often came with invisible strings. Inside, the air smelled like new wood instead of broken plastic. The waiting room was larger, warmer, and organized, with shelves of toys sorted by age and purpose, not tossed into bins. 2 therapy rooms stood ready with fresh mats, mirrors, and simple equipment that I had only seen in catalogs. A sensory corner glowed softly with lights that could calm a child without overwhelming them. There was an office with a desk that did not wobble, and on the door a small plaque with my name again. A few staff members waited politely, not staring, just present as if they had been trained to treat my shock with respect. I felt my chest fill, then tighten, because my dream was standing upright in front of me, and it should have been impossible. Damian led me into the office and placed a folder on the desk. I did not need to read every page to understand the weight of it. Deeds, permits, trust documents, all arranged with the same cold efficiency he used for security. It was in my name, the building, the renovations, the staff salaries, all set up so that what happened to my old clinic could not happen again. I wanted to protest, to refuse, to insist that I could rebuild with my own hands. But the truth was I had been drowning. Accepting this felt like breathing, and that terrified me. If he could give me everything, could he also take everything? Could a gift this big ever be free? He did not try to charm me out of my doubt. He simply waited while my emotions fought each other, gratitude against suspicion, relief against pride. Then he lowered himself to one knee, not for show, but like he had decided this was the only posture that matched what he felt. He offered a small box and an even larger truth, that he wanted a family, that he wanted me, that he wanted to choose commitment instead of endless war. I thought of Ava, of Leo, of the way my boundaries had already bent, and of the word mama that still echoed in my chest. I could list every reason it was too fast, too messy, too dangerous, but I could also feel the shape of a life we were already building. I said yes with my whole body shaking. The ring slid onto my finger, simple and bright, and for a few minutes I let myself imagine normal. I imagined Leo laughing without flinching, Ava bringing friends over without guards in the background, kids filling these rooms with new words. Damian looked relieved and frightened at the same time, like love was the most dangerous contract he had ever signed. Ethan's arrival broke the bubble. His face carried the kind of news that never comes alone. Damian's attention shifted, and I felt it like temperature change. Nikolai Volkov, Victor's nephew, was regrouping, collecting pieces, building a vendetta that would not care about my ring or my dreams. Damian made it clear we would not pause our life for fear. He would add security, move faster, and protect what was ours. I held the ring. Sensing happiness here was always borrowed. The engagement ring felt heavy and bright at the same time, like a small sun I had to hide in my fist. Wedding planning started the next morning, not with cake tastings, but with security briefings I pretended not to hear. Extra guards appeared at every gate, unfamiliar faces with earpieces and clipped attention. Damian called it precaution. My body called it proof that happiness in his world was borrowed time. I kept smiling for Ava and for Leo. While inside, I measured exits and prayed our borrowed time would last long enough to matter. Flowers arrived under watch, too. On the wedding day, Grace moved through the mansion like a gentle general, pinning veils and calming nerves with coffee. She brushed Ava's hair, then adjusted Leo's tiny tie with the patience of someone who had waited years for this house to laugh again. I watched my children in dress clothes and felt my throat tighten. Ava tried to be excited, but her eyes kept checking mine, making sure I was still hers. Leo stayed close, fingers curled around my hand, humming softly as if practicing courage. Outside, engines idled, reminders that love had enemies. I breathed, stepped into white. The chapel was small, American simple, with white chairs and soft light instead of cathedral grandeur. I walked down the aisle, hearing my own heartbeat louder than the music, aware of guards at the doors and yet choosing to look only at Damian. His expression held disbelief, as if he feared I might vanish the way his wife had. When our hands met, I felt the tremor he tried to hide. In my head I made promises that mattered. To love without losing myself. To accept protection without surrendering freedom. To build a home where children could breathe at last. Leo stood beside us with the rings on a pillow, eyes wide, shoulders squared in a way that made him look older than 6. I kept glancing at him, terrified that the attention would crush him. In the middle of the ceremony, he offered a few clear words in his new voice, something sweet and earnest that landed like sunlight on everyone's grief. Adults laughed through tears. Grace pressed a hand to her mouth. Damian's face broke open, pride and pain mixing into something gentle. Then I understood why I stayed. A child speaking was worth fear more than comfort. The reception was small too, dinner on the terrace with string lights and food that tasted like warmth instead of performance. Ava danced with Grace, twirling until she got dizzy, while Leo watched and then joined for a few brave steps. Damian held my hand as if he needed proof I was real. For a while, the night felt almost normal. Then Ethan appeared at Damian's shoulder, phone in hand, and the muscles in Damian's face tightened. He listened, nodded once, and returned to me with a smile that did not reach his eyes. I laughed, clinging to borrowed time. Morning arrived too bright. Sunlight spilled across rumpled sheets and my ring, as if the world wanted to pretend danger was a dream. Damian's tension sat beside us like a third body. He showed me a photo on his phone, taken outside my clinic within days, my face centered inside a red crosshair. A short message in Russian was attached, translated in a few cold words that implied my happiness had a price. My blood went cold, but I did not break. I stared at that image until my fear turned into something harder, like bone forming under skin today. Later, when Ava asked why my smile looked different, I chose truth without details. I told her with my hands and steady voice that we keep going because kids need us. The clinic was my promise, and I refused to let a stranger's threat shut its doors. I remembered the parents who saved coins for therapy, the children who finally said their names, and Leo's first syllable. Fear could live in my chest, but it would not run my calendar. I asked myself what kind of mother hides when other children are trapped in silence. The answer tasted like steel. Damian responded to my resolve the only way he knew how, by drafting rules. He wanted guards at the clinic, cars in rotation, schedules tightened, phone checks, and routes changed at the last minute. I agreed to what protected Ava and my staff, but I pushed back against anything that turned my life into a cell. I insisted on choosing my patients, choosing my hours, and walking into my own building without feeling like contraband. The compromise was uncomfortable, but it was real. Security outside the door, not chains on my wrists. Each guard reminded me I had been marked. 1 week later, a social worker arrived with a folder and a little girl who would not look up. Sienna was 8 and silent the way Leo once was, as if words opened a door to danger. Her backpack was worn, her hands clenched, her gaze fixed on the tiles. The system was drowning, and they had heard about my work. I felt 2 truths at once: need and risk. I should have hesitated. Instead, I knelt, softened my voice, and took her case. As she followed me inside, dread rose, because helping voiceless kids is where they strike next. The Carter Center reopened with fresh paint and a new smell of hope, but the front desk still felt like a checkpoint. 2 guards rotated outside. Another sat in an unmarked car. I hated it. Yet I kept my head up, because kids needed routine more than bravery today. Always. Sienna came in clutching her backpack straps, eyes fixed on the floor tiles like they could swallow her. I offered crayons and a simple matching game, letting silence do the talking. When I used a few gentle Russian phrases, her shoulders softened, and she nudged a red pencil toward me. Between sessions, I checked my phone for Ava's aftercare update and Leo's practice notes from Grace. Normal motherhood, just amplified by cameras and coded doors. I told myself fear could ride in the passenger seat, but it wouldn't touch the steering wheel. That promise held for 1 more hour alone. The first sign was sound, not smell. The vents above the hallway began to hiss unevenly, like a kettle refusing to boil. A receptionist frowned. Then a therapist coughed once, sharp and wrong. I lifted my head and tasted something sweet in the air. Too sweet to be clean anywhere. Training took over before panic could. I moved toward the play area, herding children toward the nearest exit while staff gathered bags and meds. I watched Sienna's face blanch, her knees wobbling. I signaled for water, for fresh air, for speed. My voice stayed calm because calm is borrowed first. Sienna crumpled near the doorway, body folding as if gravity doubled. I dropped beside her, pulling her close, trying to shield her mouth with my sleeve. My legs turned heavy, my vision tunneling at the edges. I thought of Ava's lungs, Leo's first syllable, and I refused to let go. When I woke, darkness had texture, concrete, oil, old metal, the same penny-sweet air from my nightmare in part 1. Rope burned my wrists, not deep, just enough to scream. Industrial noise pulsed behind cracked walls. Sienna lay beside me, whimpering softly, gripping my fingers like a lifeline again, now. I forced my breathing slow and even, the way I coached parents in my clinic. Fear wanted to rush, but rushing made children spiral. I pressed my forehead to Sienna's hair and pictured Ava asleep under Grace's watch, Leo drawing his tree. I promised myself I would return to them. Men watched from a few yards away, bored in the way people get when they think the job is finished. They saw us as packages, not problems. I kept my face blank, listening to their footsteps and their jokes. I waited for the moment their attention drifted. It always does. I worked at the restraints with patience and luck, using whatever my hands could find without making noise. It took time measured in heartbeats. When the pressure eased, I didn't celebrate. I moved to Sienna, soothing her, then helping her wrists breathe again. She didn't ask how. She trusted me. I guided Sienna to her feet first, because children run better when adults run second. I showed her the direction with a nod and a finger, then waited until her breathing steadied. In the next lull, we slipped into the air outside, moving fast and low, letting shadows hide us. A clatter behind us bought seconds, nothing more. We crossed an alley, then paused behind a dumpster, listening for voices and boots. My lungs burned, but I kept my hand on Sienna's shoulder, grounding her. When footsteps came closer, we moved again, sprinting in bursts, hiding whenever the world quiet. Headlights washed the pavement and I flinched, expecting capture, but hands grabbed us with a different urgency. Men in plain jackets wrapped blankets around our shoulders and guided us into a vehicle that smelled like sanitizer and heat. Relief hit so hard I shook. Damian was still out there, working. The ride blurred into lights and questions I barely processed. Someone checked our breathing and gave water, and I held Sienna's hand the time so she wouldn't float away from herself. My anger arrived late, shaking and hot, because the clinic had been rebuilt to heal children, not trap them. Damian arrived after midnight, face set, clothes marked with blood I refused to imagine. He didn't explain, and I didn't ask, because asking would paint pictures I couldn't carry. He stood beside the bed where Sienna slept, and his power looked like exhaustion. I realized protection costs more than money. Ethan's update landed in fragments. Forged paperwork, a compromised referral, a child delivered like a key. Sienna had been bait to pull me into a place they could poison. My stomach turned, but her fingers tightened around mine, and she leaned into my shoulder as if choosing me anyway still. That night I sat beside her, watching her sleep, thinking of Leo's first sound and Ava's hugs. Trauma made children disappear into themselves, and adults turned away or turned them into tools. I had spent my life fighting silence with patience. Now I had to fight forces that created it. In the morning, I called Grace, then stared at the website on my phone. I wasn't ready for hearings, but I was ready to refuse returning Sienna to anyone who saw her as leverage. Damian's world could shield her with force. Mine would protect her with forms and nightly routines. Before I left, Sienna reached for my hand again, confirming I was real. I squeezed back, feeling my heart choose a direction without permission. This wasn't just a case anymore. It was a child. It was family widening. I knew the coming months would test everything we built from scratch. 14 months later, the mansion no longer feels like a borrowed bed. It still has guards, cameras, and doors that close too softly, but my body has stopped flinching at every click. Normal, I learned, is not the absence of danger. Normal is Ava packing her own lunch while Leo argues with his shoelaces, and Sienna choosing a purple marker without looking over her shoulder. It is me drinking coffee that stays hot. It is Damian coming home before dinner more often than not, tired but present. Some nights I still count exits, then stop, and count blessings instead quietly. After the kidnapping, I could not hand Sienna back to a system that lost her twice. I filed forms with shaking hands, sat in sterile waiting rooms, and learned that love can be stamped, delayed, and questioned. There were background checks, home visits, and long weeks where nothing happened except my own impatience. Damian paid for lawyers, but I signed every page myself, because this had to be my choice, not his power. The first court date felt like standing in front of a mirror that only asked one thing: are you steady? When the judge approved guardianship, I exhaled. Guardianship did not fix Sienna overnight. She startled at footsteps, hoarded snacks, and slept with the hallway light on. We built safety in tiny rituals: morning stretches, art before homework, 3 deep breaths before doors opened. Some days she spoke only with her eyes. Other days she whispered a single English word and looked shocked that it stayed in the air. Ava taught her how to braid hair. Leo taught her how to laugh without warning. I kept reminding myself that progress is not linear. It is repeated kindness, delivered patiently. By month 12, she told me she felt safe. Leo's voice kept growing, not in grand speeches, but in ordinary sentences about cereal, cartoons, and the weather. He started reading signs on the street, sounding out letters like he owned them. Ava became the oldest, which meant she set rules, demanded fairness, and sometimes retreated to be alone, because even strong kids need space. Grace held the whole house together with soup, schedules, and gentle humor. When I felt guilt creep in, she reminded me with her steadiness that families are built, not found. I began to believe her. Some days we played cards and let laughter do therapy. At the Carter Center, the waiting room filled every afternoon with parents who looked like I used to feel. Tired, worried, hopeful anyway. My new staff ran sessions with patience and warmth, and I held weekly meetings where we shared wins like treasure. One little boy finally pronounced his own name after months of trying. His mom cried into a tissue, and the whole room pretended not to notice, because dignity matters. When I walked past the bright windows, I remembered the shattered glass and felt stubborn pride. They broke my clinic once. It stood back up for my kids. Damian did not turn into a saint. He remained sharp, protective, and capable of things I prefer not to picture. But he stepped back from the loudest parts of his work, handing more decisions to Ethan and choosing to be home when the kids needed him. He learned school pickup lines, pediatric appointments, and how to sit through a board game without checking his phone. Sometimes I still saw the old coldness flash in his eyes. Then he would blink and soften, as if remembering what mattered. Change, I learned, is not a speech. It is attendance again and again. 2 weeks ago, I held our son Miles against my chest and felt time fold. His skin smelled like milk and beginnings. From the bedroom window, I watched Damian in the yard with the older kids. Ava showed Sienna how to swing higher without fear, while Leo narrated the game in a voice that still surprises me. Grace sat on the steps, supervising like a queen in slippers. Damian looked up once and met my gaze, and for the first time I saw peace sit on his shoulders without slipping. It wasn't perfect. It was real, and it was ours. That evening we ate dinner at the long table that used to feel like a museum exhibit. Now it held spaghetti, salad, and crayons for Miles's messes. Ava teased Leo by handing him the smallest fork. He rolled his eyes and launched into a dramatic explanation that made Sienna giggle. Sienna's laugh was still new, like a bird testing wings, and every time it happened I felt my chest unclench. Grace served seconds with a satisfied nod. Damian listened more than he spoke, his hand resting near mine. Ordinary food, noise, and a miracle. Nobody was afraid to breathe tonight. I used to think love should make life safer. What I learned is that love does not erase darkness. It gives you a reason to build light anyway. Healing is not one moment. It is choices made while afraid, then made again tomorrow. I still remember the warehouse smell and shattered glass, and I refuse to romanticize any of it. I honor what we survived by how we live now. If you have ever lost your voice and found it again, share your moment in the comments. If this story touched you, please like, share, and comment with me today.